Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm the VP of Engineering at Cardano Foundation, and it's in the name. I run the engineering teams at Cardano Foundation.
Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode. It is great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Aziza.
Firstly, I want to say congratulations on your recent promotion to VP of Engineering. I want to know, what does a typical day look like for you in your role?
Actually, it's just recording podcasts and in between a bit of micromanaging my teams. No, I'm just kidding. I'd say if you want me to describe it in one word, it's pretty much diverse.
Mm,
So most of the times I spend actually in aligning with others, in meetings, writing messages, preparing memos or slides to explain something, so that
mm,
I'm whether aligned with other departments, the community, our development partners, or my teams. Although I have to admit, despite my joke, that my teams can very well take care of themselves in a good way, so they
mm.
don't need to be that much alignment with me. But yeah, I think we are aligned on a natural way.
Thank you. That's great. That's brilliant to hear. We always start a little bit at the deep end. So I'm going to ask you, what drives you forward in your life and in your career?
Um, Again, maybe one word. It's
Yeah.
curiosity. I think you see it from my CV, where I started off as working computer games industry, which is still one of my favorite stories to tell. That I worked for Ubisoft because that was like my dream job when I was a kid. Then I worked in research and aeronautics, then in automotive, then in finance, and now in blockchain. So yeah, I think curiosity is a good way
Mm,
to describe my motivation. And in the more recent years, since I emerged from this engineering role into a leadership role, it's really yeah, working with people. So in my very first days when I got promoted to a team lead role, I was asked pretty much the same why I want to be in this leadership role, and I told them, "Hey guys, I solved so many technical problems, but it's actually more interesting to deal with people and then take care of that they have a good environment to work in, doing the interesting projects, if you wish, and also
mm.
building something and defining what we are building again for people, hopefully, and not just for the sake of building something."
I love that because we've actually had conversations recently about those misconceptions around people in tech roles and engineering only focusing on the technology instead of the people. But you completely flipped that, and that curiosity was kind of equal in equal parts people and technology, is what I'm getting.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get it. And if you look,
Mm,
especially in the crypto space and blockchain space, and you see the research that's done and listen into to podcasts like yours,
mm,
or I'm a big fanboying a bit the Zero Knowledge podcast, which is all about this super interesting technology, and it's just so easy
yeah.
to only focus on the technology and those kinds of challenges you want to solve. But then if you're working, for example, in a blockchain foundation, where one of the main tasks is also to find adoption of this
Mm,
beautiful technology, then you also get a good perspective on what it means to not just build a nice thing, but build it for someone to help them with something or change the
mm.
way where something needs improvement.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And when you mentioned there the curiosity and wanting to merge that for both people and technology and the reward from that, is that what brought you to the Cardano Foundation?
Yeah, indeed. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, it's funny. When I started my career as a computer game developer,
Mhm.
then for almost 10 to 15 years, I didn't do anything with games. And then with a friend, I did just a private side project. We developed this little computer game, and
Mm,
we wanted to look at the reward system and if we can implement it on top of a blockchain. And
mm,
also, what I was super interested in during this time was peer-to-peer gaming. and saw some interesting presentations from the Ethereum Foundation, actually,
Cool.
on how to do peer-to-peer messaging in an anonymous way. And this brought me then to the blockchain space and to Cardano especially, because I was not so much looking into just joining a blockchain or a crypto project that just wants to be the next cryptocurrency out there, but that really at least claim to have a mission.
Yes.
And 2021, there was this Cardano summit, which was super interesting because it was all about bringing adoption to markets where people don't have access to certain financial products, and where we could really make a good impact for people to build their businesses on top of blockchain. And this fascinated me. And then, of course, also having this research background, the research-driven approach of Cardano really resonated with me, and that's
Yeah.
where it all fit very well together.
There's such lovely longevity and everything, and it feels like everything's just really well thought out, and there's a lovely purpose behind all of the work that you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about the mission that the Cardano Foundation has, if you wouldn't mind, just to give our listeners a little bit of information. And I'd like to know, especially when it comes to how it's going to shape the future of how we live and collaborate together as well.
Yeah, that can be a long answer.
That's okay, we've got time.
But there are three core areas where the foundation is currently focusing on. It's adoption. I think we already touched briefly on this part.
Yeah.
Then it's about education, and maybe call it blockchain literacy, if you wish. And it's also about operational resilience. And those three core areas fit very well together, because, I mean, if you speak about adoption and you're not talking just about, and it's a bit mean to say this, but you're not just talking about the blockchain bubble or the crypto bubble, where it might be even easy nowadays to find adoption for a new protocol if you've got the funding right and, of course, the tech right and the vision right. So basically, it's not so easy, but it's possible. But if you look at the what we sometimes call the legacy industry or the Web 2 world or whatsoever, it's no longer that easy to find the right market fit for blockchain where it really makes sense. And then this is one of the hard problems where we think as the foundation, it makes sense that we focus our energy on, because it helps the ecosystem, not just the Cardano ecosystem, but the blockchain ecosystem in a wider sense, to really be here for a longer time. And for that adoption, of course, education is important on so many levels. It's about technical education, about how you build on blockchain. That's maybe the easiest thing to do. Because without this piece of information, no one is able to build on blockchain.
Yes.
Second thing is also informing regulators, policymakers, lawyers out there about what a blockchain is, what it does, how it works. Especially if you look in the staking space, there are so many differences in a very fundamental way. How, for example, Ethereum does their staking and how Cardano does its staking, and you have to explain this, because otherwise, the legislation that's made built on top of this general understanding, okay, that's staking, how it's done on Ethereum, Polkadot, so it falls under the same legislation as Cardano, which makes no sense. So you really have to talk to those people and explain, and you can't expect them to make good decisions if you don't provide the information and explain. That's really important. And then, of course, operational resilience. It's about our network needs to be healthy, needs to be withstand any attacks or just technical errors. I mean, it's just, in the end, it's just software. If there's a bug, something goes down whatsoever, it shouldn't bring down the whole network. That's an easy explanation to it. And then maybe one based on real evidence. When I'm talking to, let's say, the supply chain industry, and we propose them that they can build on top of blockchain for supply chain traceability, which might be a good idea for them in terms of leveraging the blockchain as this immutable data storage, which is operated in a trustless, decentralized way. But they're very quick come to the question, Yeah, but Sebastian, can you guarantee us that Cardano will still be around in 5 years or 10 years? Or
Wow.
what's going to happen if there is a disaster? Are you able to recover from it? And this is where you run into some interesting questions and challenges
Yeah.
which are hard to solve, which is why, again, we as the foundation think it's very worthwhile to have a look
Mm.
at those topics.
It's really interesting. And we'll probably break up each of those pillars as we go through this. And I guess the first one that I want to start with is, as you mentioned, the literacy. I listened to you on a podcast recently, and I'm going to link it to this description as well because it was a lovely podcast. So if anyone wants to hear more of you after this, they can go and listen to it. But I heard you mention how you introduce or explain blockchain and decentralization to your grandparents. I found it lovely and really interesting. So, can you share with us about that? Like, what is that message that you get across when you're explaining it?
Yeah, it's it's a hard challenge again. And I won't claim that I can do it, that I'm able to do it in the best way possible, because there is this threat of, if I start explaining something about, hey, do you want to trust the banks and the systems out there?
Go anywhere.
But don't you want to be more self-responsible for the management of your financial values that you're holding? It's just so easy that they ask the question. So we should put our money under our pillow, and it's just a thing that can happen if I want to explain them or want to approach it from this area. So what I typically do is I try to explain trust and truth, and that it's. And I recently visited the Web3 Summit, and they had this T-shirt, which was actually pretty cool because it was more something about less trust, more truth, which is nice,
Oh, love
which is
that.
actually a nice statement. On the other hand, I have to say, um, even my core values are all about trust, but it's
Mm,
about trust in people. And I think we cannot solve a misuse of trust in people with blockchain technology.
yeah.
But I think what we can solve is the trust in systems challenge, which was the original vision of Bitcoin, basically,
Mm,
because there was a lack of trust in the financial systems out there. Not so much the people, or maybe the people also that are contributing to that system,
mm,
but that was the core mission. And I think it's still a bit cumbersome to explain this, but it's something that also my grandparents get, the trust component and the truth component to it. And if I take it on a technical level, then sometimes I also try to explain, hey, look, blockchain is basically just has two main features. One is this trustless feature. You
mm,
can someone have someone do something for you without the need to trust them. That they just prove to you that they did it right, which is something they can understand to a certain degree if you, for
yeah.
example, relate it to marketplaces and how they work, and they're used to the concept of a marketplace. And
Yeah.
the other
Okay.
thing is this immutable record of information, where once it's recorded, you cannot you actually cannot delete it, or you shouldn't be able to even modify it in a way that it's not transparent for people to say, okay, what has actually been modified. And this is something that they can grasp. Um, but still, sometimes I struggle a bit with this, and I'm still convinced at the back of their mind they think I'm just part of a weird Ponzi scheme that tries to trick people with mentioning cryptography and everything is true and just trust the computers. But I mean, what can I do? It's my
It's gonna be
grandparents.
fine. I think that that T-shirt could go on their pillowcases. You know, it could be made into a pillowcase too. That's brilliant, though. No, thank you. And I think that makes it very clear in general because when we're talking about it as a topic, you know, that literacy is so important, and also that trust. I want to look at that firstly as well. You've mentioned that the Cardano Foundation may be seen as a slow adopter of new things, but it's because you take a lot of time to research and test within the communities to make sure that there is safety and trust there. When I The last I heard was that you had, over 100 research papers published. That may be more now, but I'm wondering, does that method still stand to you in this day and age? and how is it shaping your current and your future strategies and standards?
Yeah. First of all, I think I have to set this right.
Mm.
It's more something that you see from the outside world related to Cardano, not the Cardano Foundation.
Oh, sorry.
Also, those 100, no, no, all good. All those 100 research papers, they've been published by the IOHK research team, which I consider as one of the diamonds in the ecosystem. Our
Mm.
researchers and the work that they have done, and we still stick to this methodology, but there are differences in the approach depending on where you currently are in the maybe the product life cycle, if you want to call
Yeah.
it that way. And I'm convinced that moving slow on those foundational layers, so the core protocol, the network technology, the consensus, also the primitives that we allow smart contracts to build upon. This should go through thorough research,
Mm.
and also validation by those peer reviewing of any papers on the major research conferences. Then there is a big gap between this research has been done and validated, and then there is a solution team or an engineering team that picks up the research and builds a software out of it. And there's a big gap between it. And this is something where we have invested quite a lot in the past to get this right, because only some researcher defined that it's possible to do something,
Mm.
implement, for example, a certain scheme for getting faster settlements on Cardano. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's on the engineering side possible to implement it, or implement it in a way that it can be rolled out to our more than 3,000 validators out there and have
Mm.
them operate it in a good way without risking their infrastructure,
Yeah.
just for example. And so that's the difficult part. And the folks over at IOHK have solved this, I think, in a good way. It still requires time. You also have to see that there is a mismatch between product development, where you
Yeah.
typically have an idea for a product, um, and you need a timeline, because you also have things like time to market, which are critical. So you shouldn't be too early. You shouldn't be, of course, not too late. But if you're doing research, the approach is, yeah, maybe I have an idea, but what I basically do is I validate the idea if it's doable at all or not. And this is a completely different approach of, I have to build a product. This is my timeline. Those are my
Mm.
resources. And then I try to get there. But for research, it can be, okay, I take my time, 6 months. I do evaluations, read up on the topic, do simulations, whatsoever. And then in the end, what I can tell you is, works, doesn't work, which you
Yeah.
don't want for the product development, of course, because after one year of development, if I go back to my boss and tell him, sorry, didn't work out, just spend the money, whatever, then of course my boss isn't that happy. And this is a mismatch that especially IOHK is a for-profit company,
Mm-hmm.
has to get right. I think even as a foundation, we are in a bit more in a simpler space when it comes to this, because we are non-for-profit.
Mm.
Of course, doesn't mean that we can just throw out the money out of the window, but it at the same time means we can make different bets than a for-profit company, in terms of taking the risk of trying something out and then
Yeah.
potentially figuring out, okay, it's not doable. Maybe it's not doable at the moment, and we can revisit it at a later point in time.
That's lovely because it
Yeah,
feels like it'll pay off in the long run, um, each time. So, and there, as you
that's the
said, there's
idea.
not
Yeah.
yeah, there's not so much at risk in the end. Um, thank you for that. So going back to the foundation, and as you were saying, the operation resilience, adoption, and education. I had mentioned that in my notes as well. They all go hand in hand. To have adoption, you need to have education. For operation resilience, you need both adoption and education to be working as your foundation. Can you tell us about some projects or any project that you've had that has had all of these three combined?
Yeah, I'd say I could mention four. Let's see if I can squeeze them in. First
Okay.
one is, of course, our academy.
Mm,
So it's foremost about education. I mean, that's what an academy is
mm,
about. It gives you. We released a free course where you learn all the basics about blockchain, about Cardano, also other protocols. Um, and it's really just about explaining how the blockchain is working. So this covers the education part, but also what the academy is doing. They are working with enterprises to figure out what are their specific needs if they want to build on top of a blockchain. And
mm,
then we provide tailored education experiences for them. Emergo, which is another entity or one of the bigger entities in the Cardano space, are doing the same with their academy. So you've got this adoption and you also got this education component. But furthermore, what you also have is the operational resilience, because what we are explaining is how staking is working, how the decentralized governance that we're currently putting in place with the Chang hard fork and the Voltaire era, how this is impacting the stability of the ecosystem.
mm.
That's also part what we explain in the academy. So this, in a very
Cool.
nice way, captures all 3 points.
Yeah.
We also do in October this year. I think it's around 23rd to 24th. I hope I get this right. At the Cardano Summit in Dubai. You can still sign up for it. There are still
Excellent.
a few tickets left. So everyone who's interested, join us in Dubai. And this event is also about all those three things. It's about, okay, we explain you what Cardano is, what's currently going on, and not just the foundation explaining it to someone, but it's more
Mm,
about the community coming together and also people from the outside world in the crypto space, but also non-crypto space people go there and learn about Cardano. And we, of course, hope that those people then start building on Cardano. So it's about adoption. And again, it's also about diversifying what kind of applications are built on top of Cardano, what kind of use cases are implemented. And this diversification at the same time for me means operational resilience. Because if we would really just rely on, let's say, NFT trading,
mm.
and then like we saw it in the past, the NFT market goes down, and we would just rely on this single application, basically that's built on top, wouldn't be pretty resilient when it comes to um, when it comes to what's good for the ecosystem and for the network. There are a few more initiatives,
Mm.
mostly in the interoperability space. So right now we are also trying to build a bridge to the Cosmos ecosystem, which we're doing together with a partner in Vietnam, but
Very
also
cool.
together with the community. And so far, it has been a great experience. And this is also all about those three pillars, because it hopefully brings more adoption to Cardano. It will enable people to build side chains, which is this architectural working piece or building block that you need for certain use cases. But it also will open up the ecosystem to into yeah to join the interchain if you wish, or
Mm.
to at least collaborate with projects that are in the Cosmos space. And by that, again, bring this diversity to the network and more resilience. And it's also about education because it's a new concept. We're sending messages from Cardano to the Cosmos space and vice versa.
Uh,
And it requires a mutual understanding on both sides how things are working, how's our consensus working, how's the tandem and consensus working in the Cosmos space. So this is also a nice example of an initiative that really covers all three pillars.
Thank you. Thanks for those. And you did a great job of fitting them all in in a nice space of time as well. You mentioned the Chang hard fork there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I saw news about that yesterday, I think came out.
Yeah, that's a big thing for Cardano,
Yeah.
because and it's also quite remarkable because there is this whiteboard video from Charles Hoskinson,
Mm.
where Charles is just one figure in the Cardano space, but of course the most prominent one. But there's this whiteboard video, and I never watched it, even not before I joined Cardano, which is maybe not the right way how you should do it. But I watched it before I gave a presentation earlier this year in Dublin. about Cardano,
Oh,
because I was
wow.
curious what the original vision of Charles was. And it's actually amazing because he lists all the building blocks for a perfect Web3 ecosystem in 2019, including scalability, including identity, privacy, all those things were in there. Pretty amazing. Of course,
5 years
we are
ago?
not, yes,
First.
right. Of course, we are not yet there. We are not
Yeah.
that year, and we struggled quite a bit with delivering on some of those points. But there's one remarkable sentence in there, um, which was super amazing for me to hear, because in 2019 what Charles said was basically they are committed, as the for-profit company IOHK, to further invest in this vision until the end of 2020. And now we have 2024, and IOHK is still there. And I mean, what they could have done is easily, when it comes to this decentralized governance that we're now introducing and basically giving the complete decision power over the Cardano network to the community,
Mm.
of course, in a structured way. But what they could have done it at the end of 2020, they could have said, okay, this is how far we got. Here's Cardano. You decide over the network. But they stick to it, and still
Wow.
further developed it, and wanted to bring everything in a shape that you can introduce something like this decentralized governance in a good way, so that the community then takes over something that's built for sustainability. So to be there, um, yeah, even in 10 years, hopefully, fingers crossed,
Yeah.
maybe in 15 and 20 years. But that's pretty amazing, that this
Mm.
dedication to the mission, and now achieving this milestone with the Changwon hard fork, which is just the first step, because it introduces basically all the things that are necessary, to implement this decentralized governance on top of
Mm.
Cardano. There will be a second hard fork happening most likely at the end of this year, which then completely activates the decentralized governance on Cardano. So right now you can maybe consider it a bit as kind of a trial period, but a special trial period, because right now there is no way back to the old type of governance. But
Okay.
it gives us a bit of a grace period to see, okay, how are things working, how the parameters that we have put in place, the guardrails for things that are allowed to do, things that are not allowed to change, or which require certain types of majorities when there is a
Mm.
voting. Um, yeah, but it's amazing. So now the community gets the whole power over the Cardano treasury. People can apply to funds for projects. They could already do this in a
Mm.
limited way with Project Catalyst, which was another experiment that we've been doing to fund ecosystem projects and drive adoption of Cardano, all done by the Cardano community. But now there is a system in place that can even have more impact on how Cardano evolves, and also how the protocol parameter for the mainnet are defined. And this can have a huge impact on how the network validators
Mm.
operate, what the incentives are for the network operators, for people building, for people transacting on Cardano. So it's a huge thing. Yeah.
Wow. And the word, well, the self-sustaining system stood out to me when I was reading about it. 'Cause it just seems like such a huge moment in time for that to be a thing that you're able to say when you're talking about it. So thank you. That's very exciting. I want to just talk to you quickly about when we're looking at adoption. Firstly, two questions. So from an outside perspective looking in, what industries have been the largest adopters of blockchain technology so far? And where do you envision that next wave of adoption going?
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job when it comes to DeFi,
Mm.
decentralized finance, new operation modes for the finance industry, for financial industry. When it comes to enterprise blockchain, I think we are still not yet there. there is some adoption, and of course the guys at Hyperledger have done a good job in the past to really bring this enterprise blockchain to a certain degree of majority. But still, at least I didn't read about super successful long-term projects where blockchain has found adoption. There are some contained use cases, even in the in certain spaces like medical records management. Of course, during COVID, there were a lot of activities around traceability of vaccination certificates and stuff like that. We even frequently mention supply chain because just as an industry with the segregated setup that you have, a lot of players involved in the value chain, and I'm 100% sure you cannot have them use all players on the value chain use the same software.
Yes.
Because just imagine you order something in China, it gets shipped to Europe with all the customs parties in there, the parcel services and whatnot until the good reaches you, and then the platforms even in there, bringing them to all use that single software to manage the whole process. That's impossible. Even if you look at regulations, all of them might have different regulations they have to abide to, and it's simply not possible. But what you can do is provide them a foundational layer, which might be the blockchain. So a system that's not operated by a single company, but that's operated by in a decentralized way by network operators that even don't have an interest in, because that's the idea of this trustless setup, even don't have an interest in what's happening on the blockchain. They're just there to operate it and provide that infrastructure. And then, for example, a Chinese custom processing service provider can build their own software on top of the blockchain. And then a customs an importer company in the US or in Europe or wheresoever, or vice versa, could do the same with their own software, but then relying on the same foundational layer, which is the blockchain. So that's the vision for supply chain. However, there are of course tons of challenges to it.
Yes. Our last
especially
guest
if you
our last guest was
at
talking about that as well.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, it was a big topic on one of our last episodes, was all of the challenges with that, because it's, I guess, something that was spoken about a lot media wise or in articles, but the reality would be that there are so many silos, and those challenges for widespread adoption is a very difficult thing to actually do. So yeah, I interrupted there when you were talking about that, but if you wouldn't mind telling us more about it.
No, fair enough. And I 100% agree, because there's then you need the same data formats basically. So if some data record is made on the blockchain by a Chinese exporter, it needs to be understood by a US importer. So there are standards out there in the supply chain space, GS1 and standards like that, that define how data can be represented that needs to be processed, but they're not that well established in the space that you can easily rely on them and expect that everyone understands them. Then, of course, there are those certificates, like certificates of origin. Where's the good coming from? And there are so many different formats for those kinds of things. And a lot of them are still paper records. Just for example, we've been doing this interesting project in the Republic of Georgia when it comes to certificates of origin for wine. Because in Georgia, they have this very specific method of making wine. But also they are facing huge issues with counterfeiting. And what they have is a lot of long paper trail and paper records, which are processed, are added to the packages that are sent over to different countries. So all super cumbersome. And so on the one hand, we're trying to bring the blockchain industry to that space and help the people. But on the other hand, sometimes it's not so much about blockchain; it's more about digitalization in general. So at least get those paper documents in a digital form, and then just use the blockchain as a media to exchange those documents between different parties. And then on the other hand, things like data privacy requirements hit, which you cannot. I would be so bold to say you cannot solve data privacy with the public permissionless blockchain per se, unless you have privacy enabling features like you might get from the zero knowledge world, because there are privacy enabled blockchains out there right now, or you're applying technologies which are hard to explain and where this literacy comes in again, where you keep the data off chain. You just make certain commitments on chain, like for example, I have signed this document. I keep the document off chain, which contains all the critical data, maybe PII data is on there, or something that just a manufacturer doesn't want to reveal. But what you need on blockchain is then someone has signed this document and you put the signature on blockchain. This can work, but then you run into issues like, okay, I've got the signature. Maybe I've got something like a fingerprint of this document also on the blockchain, because that's needed to then do a cross check and reference if this signature really was made for what you expected it to be made for. But if then someone wants to have a look at the real document and it's kept in a private data silo, so that's not that easy to solve. And then you run into problems like data availability and whatnot. So it's a complex challenge, and it requires a lot of education and explanation. And this is one of the challenges we have faced, and where we are also a motivation for why Cardano Foundation is looking into bringing this education pillar to a good place.
Yeah, even it's even the, I guess, the different laws as well in different areas too. Like the data laws that you'd be looking at are completely different from each side of the world. So and as our last guest also mentioned, it is a very messy space right now. But
indeed.
Thank you for.
There's an ISO standard. There's an ISO standard actually, because I'm German. So every time I approach a project, of course, I look for if there's a standard that I can build on. But if you look at the ISO standards and the working groups and the output they have created, especially for the topic of data privacy and blockchains, the guidance is basically just looking at PII, so personally identifiable information. Looking at this space, the advice right now is don't put it on the blockchain, because legislation is so unclear, and even the assignment of roles for a network validator. So is someone that is just processing without knowing what they are actually processing, are they the data controller, or are they just the data processor, or are they just a sub data processor, or whatever the right term for this is? And it's all unclear and hasn't been defined and can vary from country to country. So that's a difficult thing. And with data privacy infringements, the legal risks are unbounded. So that's like, it could get as worse as we have to fork Cardano, because someone wants to make a claim and says, hey, I want this piece of data to be deleted, because we just cannot delete the data on the blockchain, right? So it's a challenge.
And you're saying that, would that be a possible thing to say? Like, could that request be made for that to be deleted?
I mean, there's this right to be forgotten, at least in Europe. In the GDPR, and then you have to delete that piece of data and provide kind of a proof to the person that's requesting this. And if you cannot provide this, then you end up in a situation where your lawyers have to align with the person's lawyers, maybe, and maybe you can find an agreement, or maybe you can't, and then it gets difficult. And there are even technical solutions to this. There is something which I saw at a conference in Dublin earlier this year, where you have something that's called reductible blockchain, where you indeed can change retrospectively data that was recorded on the blockchain and still remain the consistency of the following data records.
Okay.
But then if you introduce this technical feature, you basically use this immutability feature of the data, because it then becomes technically possible to change data records. But how
And
do
it
you
opens
track
it
it?
up. Yeah. And how do you, is that like, how do you
Exactly.
show proof of all of that as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. And who
Wow.
decided that this was allowed? And so it's, when I was speaking there, I was even saying, hey, some things we cannot sort on the technical side,
Mm.
but it has to be sorted on the regulator side and on the legal side to introduce more certainty for blockchain operations, especially when it comes to enterprise adoption.
And just in terms of that, then, are regulators, are we at a stage where these these areas are working together coherently or cohesively, sorry, or is that still a work in progress?
I'd say it's always work in progress. I mean, you
Yeah, okay.
can ask our chief legal officer, but I think the regulators are much more aware of, and policymakers are much more aware of what blockchain is and what it
Mm,
isn't. So I think we've done a good job in the recent years, and people are of course more informed now, and as they were like 5 years ago, when everything was super new and maybe Bitcoin was just a bad thing and everyone was afraid of it, coming from the traditional world. But yeah, I think we are at a much better place, and there are
mm,
lots of organizations out there like INATBA in Europe, which is one of the interest groups that is trying to explain blockchain
mm.
and cryptocurrencies and whatnot to this space. And others also have done a good job, and we as the foundation try to contribute to this as well. But we're still not there. Like you see frequently in the States when the SEC is making new claims, and it's not that the SEC is kind of an adversarial party. They have they have good intentions in terms of protecting the users of
Mm,
those financial products or of those products um, for fraud and things like that. And yeah, if they have the right approach, that's of course questionable. But it also shows that we still have to keep speaking and talking and explaining and discussing, even if it gets controversial,
yes,
with those organizations to bring the clarity that we all need. I mean, there's a good reason why there are so many blockchain foundations in Switzerland, actually. So you could
because it
think
knows.
about, okay, maybe the Swiss, they just allow this weird thing, which is blockchain more than other countries do. But it's really not about this. It's really about that the legislation in Switzerland when it comes to blockchain and crypto technology is very clear. So when you are creating a new company or a foundation and you do it in Switzerland, then you typically what you do is you go to the regulators and present them with the information that you have about what your intentions are. And what
Mm,
those guys then do is they give you a very clear answer of under which category this falls, what you have to do, what you are not allowed to do. And with this very precise and clear information, you get the certainty as a
mm,
company or as a non-for-profit what the rules are that you have to stick
yeah.
to, and which is where it is attractive for a foundation to be in Switzerland. And I think also other countries have, in the meanwhile, adopted more legal certainty for blockchain.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's still work in progress, and we can do better.
Yeah, it's as you said, always work in progress, which is thank you for that. Just looking to the future as well, or in your interest space, what are some key emerging trends or technologies that you are keeping a close eye on?
Yeah, I've got one. It's a bit so right now. I'm very so in my role. I'm very consumed with operational tasks.
Okay.
Doesn't leave me much time for looking at technology trends, whatever. At least not in my, let's say, normal working hours. But
Mm,
what I do is, of course, in my free time, I read up on topics. I listen to podcasts, and there's one topic which just makes a lot of sense for me for blockchain in general, but for Cardano especially. And it's actually coming from the Ethereum space, or at least the guys have coined the term. It's called restaking. That's a huge thing right now. And it's interesting with regards to the proof of stake based blockchains. They have this game theoretic approach to securing the network by the staking mechanisms. But restaking introduces actually an additional layer where you can use this value that you get from this economical safety, basically, that you get from the stakers and from the network validators, to not only secure the blockchain network itself, but also secure other services, which might want to use this additional layer of security. And it can be really anything. So it can be arbitrary services in the AI space, or
Yeah.
I don't know, a banking system, a messaging system even. But they don't have the power, and maybe it's also not in their primary permit to create their own blockchain network. But what they want to do is inherit the security from the already existing networks in a sound way. And this is what restaking is more or less about. And for a network like Cardano, with a lot of validators, just because our architecture allows this, which is one of the cool things of Cardano, we can use this operational resilience, if you wish, and this economical safety to not just secure the Cardano network, but also secure other services as well at the same time, and even find new incentivization methods for those kinds of things, which is very valuable if we don't find enterprise adoption in terms of someone is implementing a smart contract on Cardano, but we can use this value that we have also for securing other things. And this is super interesting on the one hand from the business side. On the other hand, it's super interesting, of course, from the tech side and the research side. And it's called restaking in the Ethereum space. And Cardano has made similar research. It's called Minotaur. It's a bit different, but it's called Minotaur, and it's all about using the resources from one blockchain system to also secure another one. And also have this shared, you can use the shared resources from different blockchain systems to bring even more security. It's also a tough challenge to solve, because you run into combinatorial problems where you can easily take down the whole network and the services secured by this. So it's not that easy, but there are some recent research publications which also solve this problem. But then, of course, has been solved now on the research side. And now it's still a way to go to solve it on the engineering side as well, because it needs to be implemented in a good way.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I like that idea, because when you were explaining it, it seemed like a little pick and mix that you could take pieces from, but you actually have to be careful where you're taking from and what you're doing there.
Yes, exactly.
I want to look at a feature that we have called Move Forward and Leave Behind. This is when it says exactly what it says on the tin. We'll ask you what you think we should move forward with to survive a disruptive future, and what should be left behind in a certain space. So I'm going to ask you, in terms of what strategies regarding people, technology, and processes do you believe the Web3 industry needs to bring forward to survive a disruptive future?
Yeah, I think it's for me it's two things. One is very technological. It's about interoperability. I really believe in that the blockchain networks should be able to exchange information with each other, and make it for builders simple to, or maybe even completely transparent, on which blockchain network they are building. So the tooling should be maybe the same, or maybe not the same, because I also appreciate tooling diversity, but at least should be similar when it comes to, I want to implement something on a rollup on Ethereum, or I want to implement something on Algorand or on Cosmos or Polkadot, and the tooling should be similar to the one that I use on Cardano. Of course, not completely diluting the strengths of each network, because there are definitely unique features of each of those blockchain networks, and none of it is doing everything right. And we should also build on the strengths, but it should be easy for builders to pick. and then implement. So that's one thing, it's interoperability. And the other thing would be inclusivity. And this is referring back to my grandparents or to my parents. If you look at the wallet space, and the first thing that you as a wallet user that you get presented is, hey, here are your 24 words or your 12 words, note them down, don't lose them. Otherwise you will be screwed, and you will never have access to your wallet again and to your funds and whatsoever. And this makes people super afraid,
Yeah.
especially if they're not so technical adept. And we have to find good methods to bring more inclusivity to it. There are some approaches. If you look at account abstraction, for example, fiat shamir secret sharing. There are even wallets now that don't start with a user experience at, hey, here are your 12 words, note them down and don't lose them. It's more like, hey, this can be your first transaction, just use it. And then later on you get presented with, hey, now you can back up your wallet. Might be a good idea. It's questionable if it's the best approach to it, but I hope you get the idea that
Yes.
inclusivity is really important to get more people on board and not just the enthusiasts.
Yeah, and that accessibility is like it's the longevity of being able to keep accessing, right? Like otherwise,
Yes.
it's such
Yeah,
a
that's also true.
barrier. Yeah, it's such a big barrier for anybody wanting to have that accessibility or inclusivity. Okay, so looking as well, then, what technologies and practices should the industry leave behind to survive?
Yeah, I think I'm just here for 2.5 years.
Mm.
I don't want to make a bold claim in terms of which technologies we should leave behind. But there's one thing, actually, a colleague mentioned it this year in a team get together, and it's about that crypto people need to get out of the bubble. Because if you're in the space, everything, the blockchain, the cryptocurrencies, the hype, it's all so important. And you get easily tricked into that even at a global scale, it's super important. But I think we are still not yet there. There are so many people out there that just don't care.
Yeah.
If I ask someone, hey, do you know who Vitalik is, or who Charles is, or Gavin, or whatsoever? So the folks everyone knows in the blockchain space, they just look at me with a blank view and tell me, no, never heard of them. What's the weird stuff that you're doing? So we really have to get out of the blockchain bubble and speak to the outside world. And again, it's about education and
Yeah.
bringing the vision.
Yeah, from an outside perspective, from somebody who's maybe outside of that bubble,
Yeah,
it's really nice to hear that because it's a nice entry point for people. And again, going back to that literacy, how important it is because of everything that blockchain and decentralization is standing for. It's not really worthwhile unless the outside world really has access to it outside of that
yeah,
bubble. Um,
yeah, fully agree.
Okay, wrapping up, two final questions. What do you believe makes a good leader when you look to the future of your industry?
One is maybe it's one of my leadership strengths. It's listening. Listen to people, listen to your team, to other ecosystems, to the outside world, and yeah, just be curious.
Mm,
There's where the curiosity comes back in, and look at what the industry trends are, but also look at the customers, the clients. What do they need? And then drive the technology in the direction of what the users need.
mm,
That's Yeah, I think that's important to do, and
brilliant.
that's one of the leadership skills that we should have. And in that sense, also stay agile. I
Mm,
don't refer to Scrum with agile, um, but I refer to agility in your mind, and be
beautiful.
able to adopt new upcoming trends and whatnot.
Love that. Really like that. One piece of advice that you would give to your future self to finish us out.
I would just stay curious. I guess that's it.
Beautiful. What a great way to end things here. Sebastian, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on this brilliant episode. It has been wonderful to have you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much. Quite a pleasure.